Public Safety. I'm Assembly Member Reginald Byron Jones Sawyer Sr., Chair, and I promise this meeting won't go as long as my name. Today we're opening up the discussion on public safety for the state of California. The items to be heard today will be from the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation. The issue is CDCR's population trends, who is going to CDCR and why. And then we'll have a presentation from the Office of the Inspector General. One issue, update on access to rehabilitation. And so I would like to have the California Department of Corrections Rehabilitation representatives, Department of Finance, and the Legislative Analyst Office please come to the front. We're also we have Assembly Member Mark Stone and Assembly Member Freddie Rodriguez here. Welcome, Assembly Member Rodriguez, who's the newest member to the committee, and we definitely welcome him. He's newly elected Assembly person. He will add a great value to the discussions that we'll be having about the budget for public safety over time. As many of you know, the Department of Corrections real mission is to enhance public safety through safe and secure incarceration of the most serious and violent offenders, effective parole supervision, and rehabilitative strategies to successfully reintegrate offenders into our communities. You're one of the largest departments in state government. CDCR operates 37 youth and adult correctional facilities and 43 youth and adult camps. CDCR's infrastructure alone includes more than 42 million square feet of building space on more than 24,000 acres of land, 37 square miles statewide. The governor has made some proposals in his budget for funding of $9.8 billion, and it is always a pleasure to have Dr. Beard here. He's if not one of the foremost authorities on prisons and rehabilitation. Since he now belongs to us, he is the most authoritative person in the country right now. And I don't have any real opening statements because I really want to hear from the department. Assemblymember Stone, is there anything? Assemblymember Rodriguez? Okay, Dr. Beard, you may begin.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I'm really pleased to be here today and have an opportunity to address you. What I'm going to focus on in the beginning here is the three-judge panel and try to give you an update on where we are with that. And then I'll let some of my other individual employees come up here who can get into more of the detail of the department, population growth, and those kinds of things. But anyway, when it comes to the three-judge panel, I think that's the big thing that's been swirling around for the last quite a few years, since 2009, I guess. And the first thing that we know is that, you know, we have to meet 137.5% of design capacity. We're going to have to meet that in a short period of time, a couple of years. And going forward, we're going to have to meet or be below that for the foreseeable future. You know, we've had a lot of litigation over that number and everything else, but at this point, that is the number we're going to have to meet, and that is the number that we intend to meet. The second thing that we've learned recently is we did get a court order on February 10th from the three-judge panel, which granted us a 2-year delay to get to that 137.5%. Now, in giving us that delay, they also gave us benchmarks because they want to see that we're moving towards that. And so we have two interim benchmarks. The first is in June, that we have to hit 143% of design capacity. And then in February of 2015, we have to hit 141.5% of design capacity. And then, of course, hit that final mark in February of 2016. So where are we at in meeting that number? Well, right now we're about 5,300 inmates away from meeting the 137.5% of design capacity. That number is considerably better than the number that we heard last year, that we talked about, 8, 9, 10,000 inmates, and it's considerably better for two reasons. Number one, we have more inmates out of state because we have almost 9,000 inmates out of state right now. But one of the conditions on the extension is we can't send any more out of state. So we're sort of capped with that. We're not allowed to use anything more than the 9,000 or just about 9,000 that we have out of state. And the second thing that helped us get down to that 5,300 is the fact that we've been able to develop some in-state capacity. And in that regard, then, when we take a look at where we at to get to the first benchmark, we're less than 850 inmates away from that first benchmark. And we have a number of things coming online that should allow us to more than exceed that benchmark. We, number one, have the DeWitt facility at Stockton that is supposed to open in April. That will add 1,100 beds to the system and will also increase the design capacity of the system, which would effectively give us about 1,500 more beds if you look at the increase in the design capacity as well as the actual capacity of the facility. But there's some possibility that that may not open in April. We think it will right now, but it could slide a month or two or three. And if it does, we have two other things that are in the works that will help us meet and exceed the 143% of design capacity. The first thing is California City, which we're leasing from CCA, is open. But we still have about 1,500 beds there to fill. And we're on track to have that filled or be very close to having that filled by June. And so that will, in and of itself, allow us to meet the 143%. Secondly, we also have reactivated contracts with some CCFs, which they've been hardened a little bit, and we're calling them MCCFs, which are community corrections facilities that we had leases with in the past. And we have them now in place with Schaffner and Delano, and we have inmates already in both of those facilities. And just this week we opened Taft, and we're putting inmates in there. And we still have about 850 beds left in those facilities. So when you take it all together, we shouldn't have any problem at all meeting the first benchmark in June. And then by the time we get to the second benchmark in February of 2015, all of that capacity that I've just mentioned, even if there is a delay with the DeWitt Annex, all of that capacity should be online. And in addition to that, we still have probably about 1,500 beds out there that we're looking at, maybe reentry beds, some in some jails, and also some other CCFs that we have not yet entered into contract with, that we have the ability to bring online in state. And we believe that with those beds, plus what we already have, that we should be able to meet the second benchmark. So the first two benchmarks will be met largely with capacity. That third benchmark then, in February of 16, is going to be met in a number of ways, not only with capacity that I've already mentioned, but we also have been directed by the courts to do a number of other things to make some changes in how we do business with inmates. So we're going to be expanding on medical parole. We're going to be creating an elderly parole. And there's also, we're going to see more inmates going out on parole based on the Senate Bill 260, which was the juvenile bill that says that people that came in as juveniles who have spent 15 years in the system can be reviewed for parole. And so those three together, while they won't give us large numbers, they will give us some numbers to help with the population. But then one of the other things that was in the judge's order was for us to give prospective credits to nonviolent second strikers. And the numbers there will be somewhat bigger. Now, how we're going to be tabulating those numbers is that since we're not doing it retroactively, we're taking the date of the court order, February 10th, and prior to that, the inmates, the nonviolent second strikers would have earned at the 20% rate. From February 10th on, they will earn at the 33.33% rate, which is the enhanced rate. So as you see early on, you're not going to get a big difference there, but once we get a couple of years out, once we get out to that February of 16, we'll probably have over 1,200 inmates that will have reduced the population with that change alone. And then the other thing that was in the judge's order was to create a review process for nonviolent second strikers at the 50% mark. So once they've served half of their sentence, they could be eligible for parole. We've put a rather conservative number in there at this point because it's difficult to say exactly how much, what the parole rate's going to be and everything else, but we will get some benefit from that. And so with all of those changes that will be taking effect over the next 2 years, coupled with all the capacity that I mentioned, and with some infill beds that will be coming online either late in 2015 or early in 2016 at RJD and Mule Creek. There'll be about 2,300 beds that come online there. All of those changes will allow us to meet and exceed the 137.5% by February of 2016. So basically that's where we're at with that. And I think over the short term, over the next 2 years or so, things are looking good with our ability to meet the court's order.
Okay.
So that's all I had to say about the three-judge panel. I'd be, certainly willing to take any questions that you have on that, or if you want to ask me something else before I go and let Mr. Atkinson come up here.
I don't want to hold you up. I know you're very busy. You usually try to go through all the testimony, and then we have questions. But if you need to leave now, what's your...
If I could, I would like to. I had planned to have some things, if it's possible.
Okay. Any members? Well, I had some. Many of my colleagues have been, I'll use the word energized, are very enthusiastic about looking at rehabilitation and helping your department with rehabilitation as an investment tool. That if you invest in people, they won't recidivate and come back, which hopefully will help you get to your number quicker. And saying that, you have things like medical, elderly release, thinking out of the box for people with mental challenges, getting them into maybe state facilities, so that maybe we use the money that the feds now have to treat them, and that takes a burden off the general fund. And looking at the elderly, many of my colleagues definitely wanted to explore that in a more robust fashion and want to work with you. And then I am kind of curious about this nonviolent and letting the second strikes offenders out. But more important, not just letting them go out, but creating some type of program that will kind of capture them, make sure they have all the tools they need to be successful so that they don't become third strikers. And that may entail any kind of psychiatric, mental health, drug rehabilitation, all of that, so that we kind of funnel them in the program, either beginning half in your facility and then maybe they go, and I hate the word halfway house, and I don't like reentry, but getting them, I like to use the word happy place, but my staff says don't say that. So I want to get them in a place where they can become very successful, especially with job training, education, and everything. And my colleagues on both sides of the aisle, the Senate and the Assembly, really do want to explore that in a more robust way than we ever had before. And so if you could help us, help you, I don't want to use a Jerry Maguire line, but if you'd help us help you, give us some ideas on what we can help fund to help you not only meet these targets, but if we do these things correctly, I think not only will you exceed that number, but we'll start to knock those numbers down on a regular basis, and we'll start putting more citizens back into our society who are more productive. And I think that helps everyone in the aggregate. So.
And I would agree wholeheartedly with what you're saying. And when we look at where we'll be with the three-judge panel numbers and everything, we haven't really included the possibility of recidivism reduction, of doing a better job with the inmates who come to us and doing a better job with re-entering them back out into the community. And we haven't considered that because the numbers are really difficult to define. But we do know, and we've learned over the years, that we can do a better job in the prison system with the inmates who have come to us. The programs here back in 2008 and 2009 were literally devastated. Substance abuse programs dropped from 10,000 slots to 1,500 slots. Education programs were cut, vocational training programs, and of course we're trying to rebuild them now, and we're doing a pretty good job in the education and vocational training. We've come a long way there. I think we're still far away from where we need to be with substance abuse. And part of what we're asking in this budget with some of that recidivism reduction money was to allow us to do more in the substance abuse area, to get some therapeutic communities going, things that we know from the research that's out there that can really make a difference so that we can take these offenders, get them in the kinds of programs they need while they're with us. And then the second piece to that is what we do once they leave. And that's something we're also not doing a very good job at, and that's the whole reentry piece. But we're on the way. We do have 14 reentry hubs that have been funded. 13 of those hubs should be up and running here within the next, I think 4 are running now. The other 9 should be up and running very shortly. And then I think there's one we have to rebid, but 13 of the 14 will be running within the next few months. That's going to allow us to consolidate inmates who are leaving the system, focus on what their needs are, try to get them the non-driver's ID, so they have some ID when they get out there, try to deal with any substance abuse or any other issues they have, criminal thinking issues, anger management issues, parenting issues, try to focus on that. Also look at any continuing education or vocational training needs that we might be able to help them out there before they leave. But beyond that, we also need to look at trying to establish, and I know the state has tried to do it before and had difficulty, and we really need to work harder this time at it. We need to actually have some reentry centers in local communities, smaller centers of 200 or 300 beds, where we can get people out there and really hook them up with a place to live and with their job and with their probation or their parole officer, and introduce them to the police, do the kinds of things that we really need to do to help these people be more successful. Make sure they have their mental health treatment set up if that's what they need, or make sure they have aftercare if they have substance abuse needs. Because while an inpatient program on substance abuse is important in the prison, if you don't follow it with aftercare, your success rate goes down dramatically. So that's an area we need to do better. And again, in the governor's budget, there was a recommendation that some $40 million of that recidivism reduction money go to let us start developing those reentry concepts within the community, either in local community areas that we lease, or working with sheriffs who have space in their facilities that can take them back, and they can then work with them to reenter them. So I think we're sort of starting down the road. You know, frankly, I'd always like to have more. I'd like to ramp up our substance abuse programs in the prisons quicker, because I think that's one area we can get the biggest bang for the buck, because 70% of our inmates have a substance abuse problem. And so, I mean, I think that's one area that's very important. But then just as important is we got to have that aftercare in the community, and we also have to deal with the mentally ill that are going back in the community, something we as a nation have just not done a very good job. You mentioned the Affordable Care Act. That's going to help dramatically, because for the first time, substance abuse treatment out in the community is going to be able to be funded through the Affordable Care Act, as it will mental health treatment. So I'm thinking that that's going to help, and we will see some recidivism reductions as those programs kick in. Those kinds of things take time, though. It takes time to get the programs running, get the people in them, and everything else. And so that's why it's hard to say in the next year or two you're going to get any real reduction. But if we start making an investment today and start down that road, then tomorrow we'll start seeing the payoffs and start seeing less people coming back to our prisons. So I'm willing to, be happy to meet with you or any of the members later and even further discuss this. I think this is the direction we really need to go.
And I agree with you, and I believe we do need to sit down and talk, because that is probably the most I said where everybody's enthusiastic about it, but I think that's where we get the most bang for our buck, when we have places in the community that's linked. Because I also, the thing about and I'm new to state government, but the thing that's been so exasperating for me is everybody's working in silos, and we need to work together and have everything linked together, from police to courts to where you're at CDCR to jails to, and then afterwards when they get out, to community groups who want to work on these types of problems with inmates, and link them all together and have everyone talking together and working, not at cross purposes, but working together to ensure that that person will have a greater outcome on the other end. So I want to talk to you about the $40 million because I have some ideas, but I also want to make sure I talk to the professionals who do this every day, and so that you're linked into this and we have a greater outcome.
Okay. Well, thank you very much.
Mr. Stone.
And it's great to hear you talking about the mental health services, and a lot of those have been languishing for a long time. But the rehabilitation part, counties that are seemingly becoming successful in their AB 109 implementation are balancing the expenditures between the jails, probation, and the community programs, so they're able to do programs in jail and then continue with that outside. And the state's in a little different position potentially, and even if we have centers in various local communities, unless we figure out how to work with those or replicate that kind of those kinds of services in communities, or build partnerships with those services in the communities, and that's potentially one way to go, so that we're not having to replicate services, but build on a lot of the programs that are showing success in recidivism reduction and in managing those populations. So there's yes, a lot of work to be done, and I think we should be providing incentives locally for local jurisdictions, but also making sure that we're investing in the right kinds of programs for you, so that you don't see the same offenders again and again and again, and we can really deal with the underlying mental health issues, drug abuse issues, and keep those folks from coming back to us all the time. And so figuring out how to replicate those or work with the systems that are developing in the various counties would, I think, be very advantageous.
And I will tell you that we have been doing that. We've started. Yuba County, for instance, there's a day reporting center which is being jointly used by the county and by the state. And I have talked to the director of parole and have indicated to him that we want to work with local probation offices. We want to. There's no use us doing something in the county doing something when we can work together. It's the most cost-efficient way to do it. It makes sense. And so we've already started trying to form those partnerships, and every time I go out and talk to the Probation Association, the Sheriff's Association, I talk about those partnerships and our willingness to continue to do that, and I've seen many of them are stepping up and they want to do the same thing. So that's already happening. Could it happen quicker and more? Yes, but we at least are headed down the right path.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
And your staff will get back to you later, but we probably will be asking, you mentioned some program that you had that you're funding now, but you really would like to ramp up, or if you could, if you could come up with a ramp-up plan. I usually like to say that the Volkswagen plan versus the Cadillac plan of ramping up education programs, drug rehabilitation, all the things you talked about. What would that look like, and how much would that cost you to get back to us? And then for the LAO, Dr. Beard, I know you gave us something in your February 28th report, and I mean, really based on Dr. Beard's statement early on about him being able to meet the goals, do you think you'd be able to make some revisions in what you just captured from here and any other testimony to maybe come back later with some revised information or revised analysis? Because it looks like we'll be able to make it just to get to the capacity just with Dr. Beard's plan, and then hopefully, I'm an optimist, eternal optimist on rehabilitation. We can add to those numbers with people not recidivating as much in the next 2 years.
Right.
So,
hopefully so.
I don't know if that made sense to you.
Sure. Aaron Edwards with the Legislative Analyst's Office. So I think we would certainly agree with what the Secretary said, that we are on track under the administration's plan to meet the February 2016 deadline.
Right.
What we raise in our report is a concern that in the long term, it may be difficult to maintain compliance given that the prison population is expected to grow by several thousand inmates beyond 2016. And we anticipate that the state is going to have to stay at that 137.5% design capacity cap, at least for several years in the future. And so our concern was really about the longer term after 2016.
Well, and I guess that's the wisdom of the governor putting in more rehabilitation money, that, you know, that probably is the solution to make sure we don't have that problem.
Right.
Okay. Okay. Right. Okay. Thank you, Dr.
Thank you very much.
And who's next from the department?
Good afternoon. Scott Carney, Director of Administrative Services for the department. As Mr. Atkinson's coming up to talk about some of the detail of our population trends, I will just say that the agenda is a very good summary of what we're seeing. We are seeing increases in the adult felon population in our prisons in both the current year and the budget year. Given the recent court directions and the direction to maintain that population cap, which is a departure from what was in the blueprint that we published a couple years ago, although we're seeing an increased number, we're seeing an increased number of individuals going into the contracted facilities that the Secretary was mentioning. So we do have a slight decrease in the adult institutions. And then we're seeing the continued decline in the parole population, and we're actually dropping a little bit faster than we'd previously projected. I think one of the important contextual pieces before Mr. Atkinson talks about the details of it is at the time that realignment occurred, we were projecting overall a trend where we were headed towards 190,000 inmates. And so I think it's important to recognize that the actions taken by the legislature and the administration have dramatically changed that trend. And so while we are talking about a couple thousand increase, which does seem rather significant, the overall projections for realignment have really come to fruition. So we're down almost 55,000 in our adult institutions from where we were projecting to go. And so I think that's an important contextual piece. And Mr. Atkinson's here to talk about the particulars.
Thank you, Scott. Good afternoon. I'm Jay Atkinson with the Office of Research, CDCR. I brought a variety of statistics. I wasn't quite sure exactly how you wanted to go, so I'm going to give you just some comparisons between past and present numbers. I wanted to clarify one thing. I'm going to start with last Thursday, February 26th, 2014. The total institution population was 134,476. Of that, 117,501 was what we call our three-judge panel population. So to start with, just see the difference. Most of what I'm going to be talking about is the total institution population, which would include out-of-state, the CCFs, and everything else. So I just want to be clear about that. And by the way, as of last Thursday, we're at 144% of design capacity. So when you compare what I just told you for last Thursday, this is 1,565 higher than the total institution population last June 30th, 2013. Which was 132,911. And as Scott mentioned just a few minutes ago, and Aaron as well, the institution population is projected to be 136,617 by June 30th, 2014. Again, I'm addressing the total population, so a lot of the capacity issues are working towards a three-judge panel separately. I'm just giving you total numbers for right now. The institution population is projected to continue to increase through June 30th, 2019, when it's expected to reach 142,990. This in no way compares to 194,000 we had projected a number of years ago, so we're still way below what we were going towards previously. The projected increase is due primarily to a projected increase in admissions from court. During fiscal year 2012-2013, more new admissions from court arrived than were expected. The unexpected admissions were offenders whose offenses made them eligible for either state prison or county jail, or they had a prior serious or a prior violent offense that were unidentifiable through the electronic records. They had a prior out-of-state, prior DJJ or juvenile record. They have a current or current serious or violent that is stayed or dismissed. Sorry, I couldn't remember the last one. So those things don't show up in the electronic records that we get at CDCR. It is expected that these trends will continue. In addition, the number of second strike admissions has greatly increased, reaching an all-time high in the last fiscal year. There was 5,492 second strike admissions in fiscal year 2012-13, which is 32.6% higher than the previous year. So this is one of the things that we're really noticing post-realignment is a lot of the increase in second strikers. And also something else that we're tracking, and I don't want to get too far into the weeds, but not just second strikers, but what we call 20% credit earners. So that is where the judge would strike the strike for the purpose of doubling the term, but they still can have to do 80% of their time. So if I'm getting too deep, we'll back out after that. I just wanted to be clear that there's people that are not called second strikers, but they still have to do 80% of their time. So the second strike order by the three-judge court was going to be affecting those people as well. The active parole population on February 26, last Thursday, was 46,185. This is 5,184 lower than June 30th, 2013 population, which was 51,369. Again, as Scott had mentioned, our parole population is actually decreasing faster than what we had previously projected. The parole population is projected to be 40,973 on June 30th, 2014. It's predicted to continue to decline, although at a slower rate for the remainder of the projection cycle. The parole population is expected to be 32,748 by June 30th, 2019. Most of what I'm discussing with you right now comes out of our fall projections that you can find on our website. This is the population projections for the adult, institution, and parole populations. It is important to note that even though the institution population is projected to be higher, not all of the increase will impact the parole population because there's a delay. When they come in, they have longer terms. You don't see it's not a one-to-one immediate. More people coming in equals more people going to parole. And that part of that is because of that delay I just discussed with you, and also because low-level offenders will eventually be discharged to PRCS, or post-release community supervision, rather than be released to parole. The number of projected discharges to PRCS for fiscal year 2012-14 is 2% lower than projected in the spring projection of last spring 2013, and 11.2% higher than projected in spring 2013 for fiscal years 14 and 15. Now I'm going to give you just some more simplified statistics of looking at pre-realignment versus post-realignment, because when I was trying to figure out, to answer the question, who's going to CDCR and why, you hear rumors of upcharging. We don't have data to quantify that. So what I can look at is when people are coming in, what are they coming in for? And how does that compare to what they used to come in for? So I've got a few more statistics to go over with that, and then you can ask me questions if you'd like. For the institution, there's on the intake of court commitments, the monthly average for all court commitments pre-realignment, which I went back as far as January of 1996 through September of 2011, was an average of 5,183 a month. Post-realignment, the monthly average for court commitments, which is now from October 1st, 2011 to December 2013, is 2,984. That's the intake from court. The monthly average for just the second strike court commitments pre-realignment was 685. Post-realignment is 723. So you can see that the second strikers have gone up, while the regular other court commitments have gone down. Intake by type. We had 4 types of intakes prior to, well, we still get 1 or 2 now and then. There's new admissions, which are from court, parole violators with a new term, parole violators returned to custody, and those who are pending revocation. So that is an intake, so when they hit the door coming to state prison, they're usually one of those 4 intakes. For 2011, almost 67% of the intake was new admissions. In 2013, that's now 77.4%. For providers with new terms, it was 24% in 2011 and is 22.5% in 2013. As expected, the parole violators, which in 2011 were 7.5% of the intake, is down to 0.1% because there's no more RTCs for the most part. And the pending revocations are 1.5% 2011 and 0% in 2013. Now for the exits, those who leave prison, pre-realignment, and this goes to January of 2003 through September 2011, 10,375 was the monthly exit average. However, I have to warn you, that would include re-releases. They would get revoked, and so that's why it's so high. Post-realignment, I don't have a way to call that out unless it's something you really need. I'm trying to give you some basic numbers. Post-realignment is 1,674. And those are for exits to parole. For those who went out to PRCS, the average for all exits to PRCS post-realignment is 2,353. The last two items that make up kind of what's in our population is length of stay. The offense type impacts the sentence length, credit earning ability, housing and placement on parole or PRCS after completion of prison time. When you're comparing the types of crimes offenders came into prison for between 2011 and 2013, there were increases in some areas such as robbery. It was 13.4% of the population in 2011, and now it's 16% in 2013. Murder first was 8.1%, now it's 10.5%, and other assault and battery went from 10.2% to 12.2%. And then in addition, there's decreases in other areas such as controlled substance possession for sale, which went from 5.9 down to 3.4. Controlled substance possession, or just straight possession, went from 5.1 down to 3.2. And burglary second degree went from 3.7 down to 2.3. The last piece is basically just kind of breaking out the court commitments into different sentence status. So we have what we call our determinately sentenced 15% credit earning, that's violent. Determinately sentenced day-for-day earners, 50%. Second strikers, and then lifer third strikers. And in 2003, June 30th of 2003, the violent made up 17.5%. In June 30th, 2013, they made up 27.8%. The day-for-day credit earners went from 36.9% of the population on June 30th, 2003 to 17.1%. They've dropped dramatically. So you have fewer people coming in with less time, more people coming in with longer time. That's part of the reason the population is growing as well. Second strikers went from 23.7% of the population up to 25.6%, and lifers and third strikers went from 21.9% to 29.5%.